All right, good evening. I'm really appreciative you guys braved the weather to be out here tonight. I want to call attention to my videographer. It's her birthday, so you can turn the camera around and say hi to everybody. I love you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Hi.
Happy birthday. We're back in Acts 2:42 tonight. Have any of you ever longed for acceptance? When I was growing up, I longed for acceptance from all these different groups I was in, whether it was athletics or art or in school. I always wanted to be accepted by everybody. I always had trouble fitting in. But until middle school, then I figured out if I got in trouble and I made everybody laugh and I played the class clown, then I kind of fit in, and I found that was my role to kind of fit in with my peers. And I gained acceptance by doing that, but it was kind of a destructive behavior. I always ended up in the principal's office or sitting outside the class. And then as I got into high school, it got worse. The behavior was worse, more dangerous, and it kept getting worse. And I was always seeking acceptance from a crowd that probably wasn't going to accept me for who I really was. And I think it's kind of a universal struggle. Some people struggle with it more than others. And it may not be where you have to change your behavior to get into a group, but maybe you're trying to get into the military, and physical limitations may keep you from being able to do that, or to stay in the military, or maybe you wanted to be in a social club that you're not rich enough or sophisticated enough, or you don't come from a special family to where you actually fit in. And again, we tie like our self-worth and our importance to fitting into these groups of people. And what I thought about this week is, how great is it that we don't have to worry about that in God's church? We are accepted the way we are, and God doesn't operate this way. He's not impressed by us. He's not a lover of people's works. Our righteousness is not what gets us into the kingdom or into this community that we call the church. So I want to read from Acts 2:41 through 47, and again we'll focus on verse 42 specifically. So those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together, they were breaking bread in their homes. They received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. So again, we see this beautiful picture of the church there. But unfortunately, what we see in the Bible is oftentimes not what we see in the church today. And it's really unfortunate, but a lot of times we bring those attitudes that we have, that our culture's taught us, what the world has taught us. A lot of times we bring a lot of these ideas into the church, and they're not true. And we're looking back there at the early church to see what they were doing. And when I talk about the church, I'm not talking about the building. When I'm speaking about the church in these lessons, we're talking about you guys, the congregation. So we're faced with all these obstacles because of our culture and with having unity in our community today. And I missed a slide here, but one of the things that I believe is a real issue today is who owns the church. A lot of times we think about, who actually owns the church. A lot of times we think that our wants have priority for whatever reason. Maybe we believe we have some kind of special status. Maybe it's not that at all, but a lot of times we feel like our needs or wants aren't being met, and we feel like we have some type of ownership in the church. And our culture tells us that, like, I know from the time I was young, we're told about how special an individual is, and we're told through advertising, have it your own way. We're told that we can have things any way we want it, and we can kind of shop around to get things the way we want it. But this individualistic culture has really no place in the church, especially if we want to preserve unity within the church. And I really believe that our culture is just super individualistic and narcissistic today, and we need to understand that we're not the owners, designers, or creators of the church. God is specifically that. And we're told in Colossians 1:18 that Jesus is the head of the body, and the body is the church. And it's because he's the firstborn from the dead that in everything he might be preeminent. So everything that he is the one of importance. We have to understand that the church isn't a social club where we get to decide who's accepted into this community and who's not. There's already been a standard set for how one comes into this community. And it's not some arbitrary thing that we get to decide. Jesus has already given this specific direction on how someone comes into this community. But another problem I want to talk about is our demand for privacy today. I believe this is a huge trouble with unity and fellowship in the church, is we want to have our privacy, and I don't see how we can have accountability and discipline in the church if we have privacy from the rest of the body. I'm not saying that there aren't certain instances where you're going to need some privacy to take care of things, but we have to be transparent and genuine with one another. And I believe that all the social media and all the different fantasy worlds and the Facebook, Twitter, and all these things, and all these places that we escape to can never take the place of fellowship in God's church. The privacy can never take the place of fellowship with one another. And there's many ways that somebody may kind of withdraw from the church. And what I'm saying is we need to be cognizant of that and not allow ourselves to withdraw from the church. We need to constantly be trying to be in closer fellowship with one another. And I mean, because we need one another. One part of the body can't function on its own. That's just not possible. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul gives us this picture of how the individual members are supposed to function within the idea of the body. And we need to understand that we are all members of that body, and Jesus, again, is the head of that body, and we are not. So this fellowship that we're talking about, it's not some just abstract idea. It's, we have examples of it rooted in the Bible. We have lots of examples, and really I don't have time to go into all of them tonight. But I wanted to bring out what the original Greek word means. It means fellowship, but it also can mean partnership, sharing, communion, a sense of commonality, a shared sense of responsibility. And it's impossible for us to have that type of fellowship, that close sharing, if we are trying to keep things from the body, if we're trying to be trying to seek our own privacy, or maybe it's division. We see that in the Corinthian church, and that's why Paul was writing to them in so many instances. Is every time they got together, they were having trouble with fellowship. Every time they got together, it seemed like there was some kind of issue, and they had this me-first mentality that Paul constantly had to address. And, Paul in chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians, he specifically mentions the Lord's Supper and how they take the Lord's Supper. In chapter 12, he's dealing with the spiritual gifts, how they related to the spiritual gifts, how they thought certain gifts were more important than others, and he was correcting all this. Then again in chapter 14, he's talking about their assembly together and trying to correct issues there. And really, it all boils down to selfishness and a me-first mentality of putting myself, an individual member, before the body. And we have to remember that it's not me first, it's the body first. But part of the reason Paul did this is because devoting ourselves to fellowship, like the early church did, is so important for our spiritual health and the spiritual health of the church. And I really don't think that I could preach enough on this. This is a subject that's really close to my heart, because I think that we really fail to grasp just how important Christian fellowship is, both to our spiritual health and the well-being of the church. But another reason is that it is the way a certain church fellowship that me and Anna came in contact with when we were first married, that is what drew me back to the church. It wasn't that I thought the preacher was great, or heard any great lesson, or liked the music. I grew up in the church and kind of stopped going to church for a while. But when I was invited to a church that really fellowshiped with one another in a biblical way, it was so radical and different than anything I'd ever seen before that I wanted to be a part of that. At first I thought it was fake. I really thought it was fake, because I had never seen any church fellowship with one another like this. So that's why I believe it's so important, and I think that's why it's mentioned here as one of the first things that they devoted themselves to, because it is very important. And, people outside of the church are not, there's no way that they can have the same type of fellowship as what we have inside the church, what we're meant to have inside the church. You know, maybe we don't always live up to what we should have, but you know, all right. Sorry about that. You know, but people outside the body, they don't have the same opportunity to fellowship the way we do inside the church. And it's not because of how good we are, it's because our fellowship with one another it flows out of the idea, or out of our fellowship with God. That is why we can have this special fellowship. In 1 John chapter 1, I'm going to read verse 3 through 7. I think I just got verse 7 up there on the screen. 1 John chapter 1, verse 3 through 7. That which we have seen and heard, we proclaim to you, so that you may also have fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. And we are writing these things so that our joy may be complete. This is the message we have heard from Him and proclaim to you, that God is light, and in Him is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with Him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in light as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus, His Son, cleanses us from all sin. So we see this idea that our fellowship with one another comes out of our fellowship with God, and we're able to come into that close fellowship with the Father because of Jesus, is what this passage is pointing to. And when I'm talking about fellowship, I think it's easy to think, okay, fellowship is hi and a handshake on Sunday morning. You know, it's the little bit of talking that we get to do at scheduled events, you know, throughout the week. But I think it starts there, but it's meant to go a lot farther than that. You know, we need to be in such close fellowship with one another that we know each other's needs. We know the other needs within the body, and the other members of the body can take care of those needs. And we also need accountability. And we can't do that if we're all about our own privacy, if we don't open up to the church and to the rest of the body. You know, we're told that this early church, that they devoted themselves to fellowship, and they met in the temple courts daily, and they were studying the Word together, they were in prayer together all the time, and that they were sharing things all the time, that basically everything was being shared between them, that nobody held any special position within that group. Out of all the things that are mentioned in Acts 2:42, you know, the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayers, I think fellowship is the thing that we misunderstand the most, and I think we undervalue it the most. And that's why I chose to really talk about this, because I don't think that we truly understand until we really experience it, what it actually means. And I know I didn't. I mean, for years growing up, I was a part of different churches, and I never saw fellowship like what's shown, like the early church did. And I'm really thankful to be here where we are now, because I know that this church gets that. Could we do better? Yeah, I think everybody would say, yeah, we could. There's things we could do, but oftentimes I don't think we know where to start, And, my challenge to you is this week that, and this is something I've been over the past few weeks trying to do, try to meet somebody new every week on Sunday mornings. Every week we've got visitors coming in, and I know somebody like Otto, he seems to meet everybody on Sunday morning, but for somebody like myself that's kind of shy, that's really stepping out of my comfort zone, but it's something that we need to do. We all need to get to know one another, and I challenge you this week and in the coming weeks to step out of that comfort zone and get to know some people who are new to the church. But another thing I challenge you to do is to invite somebody over for dinner. And I say that because there's so much intimacy related to eating a meal together. And that's something that the early church was devoted to, was actually eating and fellowshipping together. That's something that Jesus did throughout his ministry. We see him eating and sharing meals with people that he shouldn't have been sharing meals with according to the Jewish custom. So if you invite me over, this is what I expect. Some fried chicken and some mashed potatoes or steak. But anyway, seriously, it's not anything that's it's not rocket surgery. It just takes us getting out of our comfort zone. It takes us stepping out of the boat and getting out of our comfort zone and really reaching out to one another and to newer people that are coming to church. And it's not always going to go as planned. I don't know how many times I've told somebody, hey, why don't you come over to the house and have dinner with us? And they look at me like, this is my first Sunday here. And I'm like, I don't care. Let's, come on over. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And that's the way I felt when I first started getting back to church. When people were inviting me to do things, I thought, this is weird. But this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is the kind of close fellowship that we're supposed to be in. And I know there's some people, and maybe aren't here tonight, maybe are here tonight, that have some severe limitations on what they can do on a Sunday morning or just throughout the week in general. So I don't want to discourage anybody. If you can't do what I'm talking about, do something. There's always something that we can do to reach out to others. So I want to close in prayer and just, again, just challenge you to get out of the comfort zone this week. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for just loving us so much. Lord, we thank you that we don't have to seek anybody else's approval, Lord, that we don't have to jump through a bunch of crazy hoops to be a part of the church. We have been accepted by you, Lord, and we thank you for that. We thank you that you love us, and we just pray that we be unified, that we would be one body, that there be no divisions between us, that we would just work tirelessly to be unified with one another, but especially with you, Lord. And we just pray that we would just seek to be devoted to these things that the early church were. All this I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.